morning, and thank you for joining us out there, Frisco. We are back again with another episode of the Real Leaders of Frisco. And I've got some amazing women with me today, and our topic today is going to focus on personal branding and brand recovery. So I am joined with some incredible women that are here in our own backyard, and I'm going to turn it over to them to introduce themselves. And we'll start over here with Karen.
Hello, I'm Karen White, and I'm the owner of Oasis Accents in Frisco, Texas. I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York, born and raised to parents who are West Indian American, so I'm first generation American. And I spent the better part of my career in corporate America as an HR executive. About 7 years ago, I got a crazy idea that I wanted to do something different and wanted more joy and passion in my life. So I left corporate HR and moved into becoming a small business owner.
So you mean there's no joy and passion in HR, Karen?
I wanted more joy, and passion.
I love that. So how long have you lived in Frisco, Karen?
Believe it or not, I've been in Frisco. This April will be 16 years.
Whoa.
And the connection is amazing because, as you remember, Angelia, you referred me for a job at Yum Brands, which is KFC, Pizza Hut, and Taco Bell. It wasn't your role, but because of your referral, I got the job, and I've been here ever since. So thank you.
I'm so happy we connected many, many years ago. I value our friendship. So thank you for being here today.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure.
Awesome. So Megan, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I have a lot of joy in corporate. I've been in the corporate space, in the banking corporate space, really for 18 years. Lived here in Frisco. I'm also working in Frisco. Lived here for 16 years. Married, 2 kids, ages 9 and 6, and I just love this community so much since I've been here. Born and raised in New Orleans, so I'm a raging Cajun.
Oh, wow.
Who dat?
That's right.
And I love this community. I love the leaders here, especially the women leaders who are so inspiring, who care for each other and lift each other up. And I'm so excited to be here, so thank you for having me.
Excited to have you as well. I just can't wait to hear your stories. I didn't know that you were from Louisiana. So that's going to be exciting to hear maybe a little bit about some of your experiences there as a woman.
Sure.
Awesome. And then we have Tammy with us today.
Yes. And actually, so you said Cajun, but maybe you're more like Cajun.
Well, raging Cajun Asian.
There you go.
Cajun. I get it. I love that.
So I'm Tammy Miner-Sagan. I've been here 18 years now. Hard to believe. 3 girls, 2 of them in college, 1 of them still at home, and we're almost booting them out the door. Empty nesting soon. But I have a background in the arts, and started playing piano and violin since I was 5. But then it turned into even more as I've lived in Frisco. So it's become a leadership position for me, and then marketing and branding as well. And then it evolved into doing marketing and branding full time. So I'm really excited about our conversation today, and I love you all, ladies.
Yeah, it is so incredible to just be here and just have girl talk today. Mm-hmm. And that's really what we're going to do. We're just going to have a conversation. And those that are out there watching, you just happen to be the recipient of some good old-fashioned girl talk as we talk about personal branding today. But I want to open it up and just ask you guys, when you heard the topic personal branding and brand recovery, what were some of the first things that came to your mind?
I think there's a lot value that you bring, whether it's professionally or personally. But for me, at the end of the day, it's about authenticity and how you display that and how you show that and how you care for others and your genuineness in your ability to perform in various areas. So for me, authenticity.
I love that.
I love that too. And I would say, with the rise of social media, because when we were growing up, there wasn't a social media presence. So there wasn't even this thought about branding.
Yep.
But now, because it's prevalent everywhere, you do have to think about how you're presenting yourself, what you're saying, how it looks. Do you have consistency? And so these are new things for people, a lot of people to adopt. And if you aren't, on social media, then you might not be thinking about it, but the world seems to be digital. And especially over COVID, it's even more important, or it was, because that was the only place people found you. They didn't see you in person anymore. So that's what I thought about was, the brand recovery. I think a lot of people are having that issue now because they had realized their digital presence maybe wasn't exactly what it needed to be to reflect who they are.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because many years ago, I worked for an iconic brand that spent a lot of time talking about branding. I started my career with the Walt Disney World Company, and there's probably not a lot of people in this world that haven't heard of the Walt Disney World brand, and it wasn't accidental. I mean, they spent a lot of time thinking about who are we and who do we want to show to the world that we are, and everything that we did was about brand alignment. And if we did anything that was off brand, we were quick about correcting that because brand was everything. In fact, I've heard the statement that your brand is what people say about you when you leave the room.
Right.
And so we've got to be very cognizant of our brands and protect it, especially as women. Karen.
So I've been focusing a lot on branding over the last 5 years because, as a business owner, that first impression, that lasting impression is my brand. And when I think about my prior HR life or even at Oasis Accents, to me, it's all about impact and experience and how an individual feels. So when they come into my store, I'm not selling art.
Right.
I'm not selling a piece of art. I'm selling inspiration. I'm selling how that person feels when they see that art, when that art's in their home and they say to me, I get so much joy when I pass that art every day in my dining room. So Maya Angelou talks a little bit about it's not about what you said or what you did. It's about how you make someone feel.
That's right.
And that's exactly what
100%.
I'm trying to accomplish with my store.
Yeah.
It's interesting because everything I've heard from each of you guys, it just kind of dovetails off of each other. And it goes back to that word that Megan started with, which is authenticity. And it's really being true to yourself. And I think, as women, it's so important to tell our own story because the world has a way of telling our story for us if we don't. And it just so happens that all of us sitting around this table are women of color. And so, we've got that double or that added characteristic. And so people might be compelled to tell our story or have our narratives for us. So for us, we've got to be very focused in telling our own story and identifying our own brand, but making sure that it's authentic to who we are. And so for me, it's about first knowing who we are. Right. And so let's talk a little bit about knowing who you are. I mean, when you guys think about yourself, like how do you think about who you are from a brand perspective and what you want to portray to the world?
I mean, I will say that, so grow up, my background, I didn't grow up in Louisiana, but it was Rockford, Illinois. And it was, 90% Swedish. So like literally people when I was in high school would stop and be like, oh my gosh, are you Christy Yamaguchi? I'm like, yes, Christy Yamaguchi is walking around in Rockford, Illinois. But they just have an impression of you just because of how you look. And I had to grow up with a lot of bullying and based on how I look. So I really had to understand, okay, so that's my wrapping. I'm obviously Asian, but who am I? Who am I really on the inside? And am I going to, react and be an angry person at that and always project defensive behavior or a face that's like, just stay away from me? Or, can I turn that into something good? And it's a talking point. They come up to me and ask me if I'm Christy Yamaguchi. I can actually turn it into something, hey, no, I'm not, but XYZ, right? So kind of moving that along. And I think what you're saying is right. I mean, you just have to know who you are. And for me, it's just, I want to be positive. I want to be an inspiration. I want to always work to help other people grow. The rising tide lifts all boats. That's how I feel. And I want my life to have that trajectory always. And so if we're always raising, that means I'm going to get to know a lot of people in what I'm doing because I just love people and I want to keep projecting their stories and we just keep making this beautiful tapestry. So I think for me, that's who I am. I remember, I think it's Madeleine Albright said, there's a special place in hell for women who don't help other women.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard that.
She did.
And it's powerful, but
I've heard that. It is. But, we all can help each other's brands too when you know, we work together. And that's what I love about Frisco is we see a lot of that.
I love that. I love that. What else do you guys want to share about that, just in terms of who you are and the brand that you're trying to portray? Because to me, I think, you know, I want to be able to have a brand that's so predictable and so defined that when somebody sees me do something or hears somebody say something about me, they go, no, that's not Angelia. That's, you know, because it would be off brand. So kind of what are some of those things that describe you? And even what are some of those things that would be completely off brand for you if somebody said those about you?
Wow. So I mentioned my West Indian roots. My parents came to the States in 1960. And growing up, I actually didn't really see my father that much because he was working. He was working so hard. Yeah. He had multiple jobs. There's a joke about West Indians always have multiple jobs. He went to school at night. And 7 years later, he bought our family home in Brooklyn, New York. So while I never saw him, he was probably my biggest inspiration. He taught me what it is like to have a work ethic. So when I was in corporate America, working 16 hours a day and traveling around the world, it was about excellence and high standards and knocking it out of the park. So I've taken all of those lessons with me to my small business. And again, I talked about, it's about making people feel, but it's also demonstrating to them this is high quality, high energy. It's a place that you're going to love, you're going to enjoy. And how I greet people when they open the door is the feeling that I want to impart from the time they step in till the time they leave. So when people see me out in Frisco now, they're saying, that's the art girl. You're the art girl. You're the art girl. I'm the visual art girl.
I love that.
And even if you haven't met me, you know that's the art girl. She's got the best art in town. And I've worked really hard to establish that brand.
I love that, Karen. And as I think about you, because as you mentioned earlier, you and I have known each other for many, many years. And my first introduction to Karen was she actually worked on my team at Frito-Lay. And so as her manager, your brand still holds true to this day. Consistency and hardworking. So if anybody said anything otherwise, I would be like, no, that is off brand because that is not the Karen that I know. So
and it was actually funny because we never talked when I worked for you. We had our regular updates, but I had assurance that you knew I was doing what I had to do and knocking it out the park and making you look good and supporting you. And, you know, that was just something that I always valued. I always valued touching base with you, but I knew you knew I had your back and I was going to work as hard as I could.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. Love that. You know, Karen, we have a lot in common. You know, my parents also worked multiple jobs and, you know, they were migrants and, you know, so they worked multiple jobs to get us through school. And, you know, we were in an environment where we had to fend for ourselves quite often and learn to have your own motivation and keep the eye on the ball. And so when I got into my career, that work ethic that I learned and instilled in me from my parents really transpired in my career. And, you know, it wasn't until I had a conversation, I was exiting one of the banks that I had worked at. And, you know, I got a call from an executive. And, you know, he called me to wish me well wishes. And he said, you know, I just want you to know that, and mind you, it wasn't intentional when I was working there that I was creating a brand. I was concentrating on just eye on the ball, outperforming excellence and work ethic. I just wanted to work my butt off. Okay? And so he said something to me that was really impactful to me. And it was an aha moment for me. He said, you know, Megan, you're leaving behind a really great brand.
That's great.
And, you know, you're leaving behind that Megan brand that you created in a very short period of time. And that, for me, that moment, I was in tears. And I just remember, like, that was validation of all that hard work. But at the same time, it was a moment that I realized that I had a really strong and really huge responsibility of leading a path for other women who aspire to be in corporate banking or in the corporate space. To lead a path for them and to help them get them there.
Right.
I love that.
And it was just a huge aha moment for me. And it was just a midpoint in my career.
Wow.
So thank you for sharing that.
No,
I love that.
You know what I
story.
love about that too, Megan, is that you weren't thinking about a brand. You
I
know, you were
wasn't.
doing you.
Right.
Yeah.
I was just totally doing
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
I wasn't even thinking about that.
Right. And,
Yes.
and
I
I
love
think
that.
for, a lot of people, they don't realize that that's what they're doing. They're doing you know, they're doing themselves. And there's something in there that if you just kind of bring it out, it can actually become a brand.
Yeah,
you know?
I love that because when you were talking, it reminded me of the concept of unintentional and intentional branding. And so what you just described was unintentional branding. You weren't focused on it. It was just a product of who you were and what you did. And oftentimes you have people who focused on the intentional branding, like this is who I want to become.
Right.
And it's not as authentic when you do that. But when you are just being you, going about your everyday life, that in and of itself is your unintentional branding. And that's what people see and that's what they remember. It's not so much, as you talked about, it's not so much about, what you say, but it's how you make people feel. And your unintentional brand is about that emotional connection that you make with people. I love, you guys, these are incredible stories. And I know that we are probably almost out of time. Like we found
Already?
we got a little bit more time. Like in the last episode, we kept talking because as women, we don't always get together and have these conversations. So we've got a little bit more time. I'm getting the signal that we can keep going, which is really exciting. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about brand recovery. Because this is one that sometimes we don't always talk about as women in particular, because nobody wants to tell a time when they failed or they got it wrong or they went off brand. But we've all had those moments. If we're really honest with ourselves, we've had those times when, wow, my brand was tarnished because of something I said or did. And this is how I managed to course correct and get my brand back on target. And so I would love to just kind of hear, as much as you guys are willing and comfortable to share with the four of us in the room, and maybe I don't know how many people are going to watch it, but share a little bit about brand recovery. And I'll start with, as we think about just brands in general. And so I think we're all old enough to remember the Tylenol scare. And you remember when I think something happened with Tylenol, it was laced and they pulled all the Tylenol from the shelves. Or I know being in Texas, we all remember Bluebell, the ice cream.
Yes.
Is it Bluebell?
Yeah, I think it was Bluebell.
Bluebell ice cream. And they had to pull that. And so there are large brands that have had some really interesting things happen to them that has tarnished kind of their reputation. But here today, I'm still eating Bluebell ice cream and I still have Tylenol in my medicine cabinet. So that tells you that these brands have managed to recover. So I would love to hear just some personal stories from you guys on how your brand may have gotten off target or off brand and how you managed to course correct and recover.
I mean, I think that everything in life comes down to trust and communication if you want to be successful. And so when there's a breakdown in either of those, that's where something goes wrong. The consumer all of a sudden doesn't trust the product. Or if it's a person, if somebody says something about you to somebody else, then there's a breakdown in there and you didn't even have anything to do with it. And so I would say, in some of the, even if you're in the PTA, there's a breakdown and somebody says something or somebody thinks something because you put something out there. It's always about trust and communication. So I think when I've had a couple instances where people have said things about me that are false, and then I have to kind of figure out, well, what do I do? And really the best way to do it is just go straight to the source and then work on building that trust and communication. I mean, I think that's the best way to rebuild your brand. On the corporate level, that's what they're essentially doing. Is there was a breakdown in trust because of their product. Something failed, something went wrong. That's okay. But it's how you handle it after that. Do you run away and get scared? Do you just hide? And then that gets worse. Like you have to address the problem.
I love
you
that.
You have to go ahead and, and one of my good friends says, you just do it scared.
Yep. Yep.
You don't want to do it, but you just do it
I
scared.
love that. I love that. I'm reminded of a song and a phrase that says, we all fall down, but it's how we get back up again. And so the reality is we all will fall. We all will have those deviations in life that are not on track. But how do we course correct? So awesome story. I love the communication and the trust, because that is absolutely critical for brand recovery.
Yeah.
Who else wants to share?
I would say my recent brand recovery story was not having a brand. So when I first opened Oasis, I thought many of my customers would be like me. And I'm the type of person who love interior design. I've got a big house to fill. They'll come and just buy my beautiful products. Well, nobody came the first couple of years. Why? Because one, they didn't know about the store, but I also didn't have a brand identity. And my very first salesperson, and Laura, love her. And if she's hearing this, I may not have said that I appreciate you back then, but she told me very early on, Karen, people don't want to see what's in the store. They want to know about you.
Right.
And I was like, I don't want to be the face. And I resisted for a couple of years. And it's only been the last year or so that I've started sharing my journey about going from corporate America to small business owner, failing and getting back up and doing everything I could to save my business. If I post a piece of art, nobody likes it. If I post a picture of me and my journey and, the lessons I've learned, people are like, going crazy. One story, I had a lady, she came into the store and she said, I read your story on Instagram, one of my posts, and she's like, and I drove from Dallas and I brought my 2 little girls because I wanted them to see a strong businesswoman.
I love it.
I love that.
So at the end of the day, it's not about the art. It's about the experience. It's about my journey in terms of how I can bring this joy to my customers.
I love that, because what you just said, Karen, is it's about your personal brand. And a part of your personal brand is your personal story.
That's right.
And it's so interesting that you say that, because, on the campaign trail, it wasn't all of the statistics and all of the studying that you have to do when it comes to the city, or even your ideas about what you want to happen in the city. It was my personal story that people still tell me today that I loved hearing your story. Yeah. And, so much so that I have this nickname called Tiny Tim because of a part of my story that I shared with people about growing up and being cast in a play. So again, it is so true that it really is about your personal story. If people can connect with you personally, they will support you, and they will buy whatever you want them to buy. Because they first connect with you. So that's a powerful story.
Absolutely.
And to Laura, let's just make sure that she gets commission off of that advice that she gave you years ago.
Laura's in New York now, but I didn't listen. But, a big part of it is when you make a mistake, again, it's how you come back. And, I'm all about giving credit where it's due. And she was right.
Love that.
Yeah.
That's really interesting, really funny about the personal branding piece of it. Early on in my career, leading projects and leading a team was something that I had to learn to do. And I wasn't really trying to build a personal brand, but my brand, similar to Tammy, what she was saying about trust and communication, I had to really learn that. And I knew how to communicate, but it was really when you're working on a long sales cycle or a long project cycle, it's really hard to keep everyone bought in and continue to buy into the project. And so I had to learn really the hard way of really they're buying into Megan's project.
Right.
And, how do we get them on the wagon? And it was that personal connection that I had to build and continue to build with my teammates and with my colleagues to make sure that they understood why we're doing this. But at the same time, it's our goal. And when we continue to build the relationship and shared stories about our families and things that we cook at home. I mean, food connects everyone, right? And, all these stories about, what we're doing on the weekends and all that good stuff. It's just all the personal stories that we bring in and we tell each other and we share. That was something that was really impactful for me. Yeah. It's just, that was a huge recovery moment for me early on in my career.
I love that.
I feel like the the concept of storytelling is really the key, because people connect to people, no matter what sector you're in and what position or whatever. And even in, like you said, your art, I mean, that's what I encourage a lot of our local artists and businesses to do is, tell the story behind what you did. Because that's what gets people excited about it. And then they want to know more. It's not actually the physical product. So the storytelling is so important as part of the brand. People want to know who you are.
That's right.
And we're all people. Like, we just love stories. I mean, that's why we watch movies. That's why we read books. It's all about the story. It's not about all the facts and figures. And, you're going to bore people with that. And when you lay out, all your accomplishments, they want to hear the story behind it. They don't want to know all the percentage increases and stuff like that.
Yeah. And then people also want to know the failures and the successes. No one wants to talk with someone who has got it all right. You're clicking on all cylinders. And it reminds me of my husband and I have done a lot of marriage counseling, and a part of the effectiveness of that is telling people about where we failed and the arguments that we have. Nobody wants to talk to somebody that says, well, we have never had an argument. Well, really? If you're married, you've had your share. And so it's being, again, it goes back to that word that you said earlier, Megan. It's about being authentic and being, real with people. And so I love that. Okay, so we probably are getting close to our time now. So my final question to you guys is, what one tangible tool or piece of advice or lesson learned would you share with the women out there in Frisco in terms of building their own brand or brand recovery that you think would be powerful to share? I know oftentimes when we have these kinds of conversations or conferences even, we share all of this great insight and then people leave kind of like, well, what tangibly did I take away from that? So we don't want people to leave this episode without having something like one tangible thing that they can, put into use and have it be a practical thing that they use every day. So who wants to start with their piece of advice or lesson learned?
I mean, I would say just make sure you do have a digital presence because it is actually very important now. I would have said before, don't worry about it, but make sure you do. And then make sure you're looking at it and evaluating what you're putting out there, if it's consistent with who you are. And of course, before you're going to have to know who you are. But you want to keep that consistent message. And I've passed that on to my girls too. I mean, they're very careful on their social media. I've seen a lot of their friends or other kids' friends, and I'm like, just please don't post the bikini photo or whatever it is. And just think about what you're putting out there for people to see, because they're all looking. And I'm sorry, I'm going on, but my oldest has her own business now. She's an entrepreneur.
Oh,
yes. And so she has had to think about, all right, how do I do product placement? How do I, get people to know I'm out there? And so just finding a mentor, if there's, she's found great mentors in her Waco community at Baylor, and that's really catapulted her business. And now she's doing wholesale. And I mean, it's incredible. So you don't have to do it alone is another thing, is find people, talk to people. People do want to help.
I love that. Those are some really good nuggets.
Yeah. So for all the women leaders, okay, be authentic. Be true to yourself, have empathy, and you're going to get elevated. And you're going to get elevated in so many different ways. Don't forget where you came from.
I love that.
Oh, that's so good.
Say more about that, Megan.
She's got such a big story about where she came from. I mean, I don't know if you have time for it, but eventually you got to hear her story of the whole thing. And then we're going to need Kleenex.
Oh my gosh.
It's really amazing. So maybe another episode we'll have to do that episode.
I am looking forward to that. We have to come back.
It's incredible. Incredible.
Somebody mentioned,
Part 2.
I know. Somebody mentioned last night, are you going to do something called Herstory, where we talk about women's history? So we have to come back.
Megan's your first guest. She's your first
Megan,
guest
you'll
on
be
that
my
one.
first guest on Herstory.
Oh,
so
my
I love
gosh.
that.
Yeah.
Oh, that'd be so cool.
Karen,
I'd say
parting words.
my tangible lesson is fail and pivot. People do not take advantage of the lessons that come from failure. Even when we were in corporate America, you kind of brush the failure under the rug sometimes. But I never forget, I had a boss, I made a huge mistake.
It wasn't me.
It was Fred.
It was Fred.
Sorry, Fred, right now. And he let me make the mistake because he wanted to prove a point. And when he brought the mistake to me, I was devastated. That man was like a father to me and still is. But he needed me to go down the road so I could then gather the learnings from that mistake. And as I mentioned, my first couple of years owning my business, there was a lot of failures, and I could have hid. And sometimes I didn't get out of the bed because, it was really difficult. But I got back up. I learned from the failure, and I pivoted swiftly.
Yes.
And because of that, I'm still here today. And I'm also here today because of women like you, Angelia and Tammy, who have mentored me. And to your point, Tammy, you have to have a mentor. You have to have a small circle of people to bounce things off of your village that you can check in with, and they can, tell you, you're on the right course, or maybe you want to think about this.
I love that. I love that. You guys, and you almost made me cry, Karen. I'm just sitting here thinking, wow, there's such power with women getting in the room and sharing their stories. And my hope is that, with these series and these episodes, that we're starting something really special that we can continue. I love the stories. I love the insight. And hopefully those of you who are out there taking something away that you can use when it comes to your personal branding. I think for me, as we wrap up, it's really about being true to yourself and staying the course and being focused, even though, because we all will have those pressures that are pushing against our brand, things that will tell us, no, you really should be here or you really should be there. And knowing who you are and not allowing society or anybody outside of who you are dictate your brand. I get to decide who my brand is, and I get to decide who my brand is not. Nobody else makes that decision other than me. So own your brand is kind of my final call to action for women is, you are the master of your own brand, and so own it. So with that, we're going to wrap up our episode for today. I know. We got to keep this going. I know it did. And we will see everybody next week on our next episode of The Real LeadHERs of Frisco. And so hopefully you will join us next week where we're going to talk about emotional intelligence. And so that's going to be a really interesting dialogue around how do we control our emotions under pressure as women. So thank you guys for being here today. It was so much fun.
It was so fun.
Thank you guys. Take care. Bye.